Good evening. Welcome to the Euripedis Parsolfo Spiritist Center. It is with joy that we gather here once again for our Sunday lecture, an opportunity for study and enlightenment. When we leave our homes and seek out others, the Spirit at our center, it means to us that the seed of knowledge has already been planted within us. This is very important for our life. Let's begin by harmonizing, before we read, before our lecture, the message you received, which is a message from the book Alda de Souza, EDLA, psychographed by Chico Javier Pusavi. Now, while it is today, behold, your holy moment to help shines forth. Cast a compassionate gaze around you. Extend your hands to the children of bitterness. Notice the misfortune here and there and there. With Leo, no bread, light, or home. Ignite your own love. Make your tranquil. Sweet and pure faith shine ye up. Now is the decisive moment. Open your heart to the living Christ. Do not let time pass in vain. And by helping and serving tirelessly, you will reach, step by step, the eternal glory of the resurrection. Ali Mali Tisa. And let us pray. Then let us close our eyes. Embrace our hearts. Unify our thoughts. Looking for the kind, gentle appearance of Jesus. Grateful for the opportunity to once again gather here in this house of prayers, in this hospital of souls. Thank you to the friendly spirituality, the mentor of this house, for the fluidic dispensation that is poured upon us all at this moment. May it expand, reaching every corner of this hospital, visiting every bed, expanding also, reaching our brothers and sisters from the farm, our homes, our families, our places of gathering, reaching also those brothers and sisters still asleep, needing light. May today's lecture be promising, full of light, understanding, and consolation. Thank you, Jesus, for not giving up on us, and may your peace, your light, and your love envelop us and remain with us in this environment today and always. Go. And so be it. We now invite our dear Max Lânio, who, with all his affection, comes to speak to us about Jesus and ourselves. Welcome, Max Lânio, and have a good lecture.
Good evening to all. May the peace of our sweet friend remain in our hearts today and always. When Spiritism emerged, it was a philosophy. Panja, in the first publication of 1857 of the Spirit's book, Robuzant Astu, with only 501 questions, already had a question that defined Dismal, despite being a spiritualist philosophy, as Kardec called it, its moral direction. the question that constitutes the shortest answered question in the entire current, the Spir Idem Triumphritus Spor, with its 109 questions. What is the most perfect type that God has offered to men to serve as their guide and model? Omnes tipo. And the benefactors answer with a single word, Jesus. So the Spiritist doctrine for a long time, and even today in Europe, for example, when we work with some people there, we perceive a distancing of native Europeans from Jesus as And at the beginning, the end of the last century and beginning of this 20th century, or rather, the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, we had problems with people who did not accept Jesus, forming the religious side of the Spiritist doctrine. It was necessary, as Humberto de Campos said in the book Brazil, Heart of the World, Homeland of the Gospel, Home, that Bezerra de Menezes be called to preside over the FEB, Brazilian Spiritist Federation, to be able to guide the direction of Spiritism. And later, with Emmanuel, we came to know the threefold aspect of the Spiritist doctrine in an irrefutable way. There is the religious aspect, the philosophical aspect, and the scientific aspect that go together. They are inseparable. The Spiritist doctrine cannot be seen only as a religion, but it also cannot be seen only as a philosophy or only as a science. It's all three things together at the same time. And our path is the path of the gospel of Jesus, because we could take any religious path, we could follow Buddha, we could follow any other religious school that wasn't the gospel. But already in 1857, the benefactors made it clear that the most perfect type we have to follow is none other than Jesus. And if we observe, speaking of Jesus, at least for me it's impossible, because the spiritual scope of Jesus is so far beyond that any human basis we have here to speak of him will not even be able to approach the greatness of this being who is the coordinator of this planet, may call it. Therefore, the title of our lecture is Jesus and Us. But we are not going to talk about Jesus, but we are going to listen to him speak. And we are going to try to understand what he was saying. Because when Jesus arrived here on earth, he was rejected by many. Immediately, he betrayed so many others who depended on him for the relief of their physical and moral pain. And he brought about situations of great complication and difficulty in understanding. It is so true that his persecutors took him to the cross and murdered him. So Jesus, even back then, faced difficulties in delivering his message due to the primitive complexities of the human psyche on earth, which prevailed then and still prevails today. He always said he who has ears to hear, let him hear. He who has to see, let him see. He understood that most people did not grasp the meaning of his message. This is why he himself promised in a very clear written way that the evangelists recorded that he would send a new comforter. It wasn't him, but another comforter who would bring everything back so that we would remember what we had forgotten, and would bring more things that he couldn't say, then things that we wouldn't be able to understand, wouldn't be able to bear. So when Jesus was on earth, and even today in certain places, it is still a problem to accept him. There comes a time when Jesus will have the opportunity to speak a little about himself, and those who were beside him at the time didn't understand, and many religious schools still don't understand today. When he was in the Sanhedrin, he began to make some exhortations that were transcendent, not material, but transcendent to the spiritual, adult. And he said, and there were Pharisees there, several, who were there anxious to find some fault in Jesus so that he might be condemned according to the justice of the Hebrews. And he said, this is recorded by John in chapter 8, verse 32. If anyone keeps my word, he will never taste the death. and he that keepeth my word shall never see death. The audience, having heard this, brought Jesus' utterance to a terrestrial level. Death for them, as for many here on this earth today, is the death of the physical body. And what will they say to Jesus? Are you greater than our father Abraham, who died? So Jesus was speaking of a transcendental death, and he was speaking of a material death. The prophets also died. And they asked Jesus, who do you claim to be? So, you see, it's a very difficult situation to talk about spiritual things to someone who can't understand beyond material things. To exult means to feel immense joy. He exulted. He exulted at seeing my day. If I talk about earthly things you don't understand, how can I talk about heavenly things that you don't understand? I was talking about Nicodemus, a respected doctor of the law. So we realize that understanding the transcendence of Jesus' words is the great challenge. And Jesus will answer them like this. Abraham, your father, rejoiced. To rejoice is to have immense joy. He rejoiced to see my day. He saw it and was glad. If Abraham had died, how could Abraham have rejoiced? How could he have been happy to see their day if Abraham had already died centuries before? That was their reason. And what will they do? You are not yet 50 years old and you have seen Abraham. In other words, they didn't understand anything but Jesus, serene, gentle, and mild, continued answering them. Truly, truly, I say to you before Abraham was, I am there. Truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. If you go to some religious schools that follow Christianity, they can explain this. It was up to the Spiritist doctrine, 18 centuries after Jesus said this, to bring clarification to this. And then a little more with Emmanuel, definitive clarifications. And what did they do when Jesus said this? They picked up stones to stone Jesus. And Jesus hid himself in some way because his time had not yet come. Because when his time came, like a meek lamb, he surrendered. But at that time, he still had much to teach. And he hid himself and went away. What are we here to resolve this issue? Before Abraham was, I am, Jesus affirmed. How are we going to understand these words of Jesus? Well, we will then use the teaching that the benefactors who are on a level of very high evolution, some of them have access to Jesus. For example, Sister Renand, who is from our home, the governor of our home at that time, were the only two from that environment who had access to Jesus. Access doesn't mean they're there every day, having direct access to Jesus. And these benefactors who came through the blessed hands of this superior spirit called Francisco Xavier, whose spiritual stature the world then still doesn't know. These people, these spirits, brought profound revelations that will make us understand certain expressions that Jesus used. I am before Abraham, which we wouldn't understand without them, would we? For example, in 1938, Emmanuel brought through Chico Strix Xavier a book that is an emblem of, let's say, conciseness, of the ability to put on paper in a short moment the entire history of humanity. The book he called On the Way to the Light book. This masterful book, a pearl in the 20th century, before the 20th century, was one of the 10 most read and most placed books in the, let's say, in relation to, furthermore, they are important in the Spiritist doctrine, according to Feb statistics. And there, you will say, traditions of the world of the spiritual world. See, that is in the direction of all the phenomena of our system, referring to the solar system that exists, a community of pure spirits and by the Supreme Lord of the universe. When Emmanuel says this, it's a surprising revelation. He's telling us that each planet in the solar system has a Christ who cares for that planet. Ours is called Jesus. The Greeks, before Jesus, already had an understanding of this. They called these beings demiurges, beings beyond human comprehension. Emmanuel is categorically stating that according to the traditions of the spiritual world, there is a community. Each planet has its Christ. Each planet has its demiurge. Who cares for that planet? Jesus cares for ours. And above all these planets, there is one who cares for the entire solar system, which Emmanuel doesn't refer to here because it's beyond our comprehension at this evolutionary stage. But it's a being who probably has a safe haven in the sun itself, the immaterial being who is obviously beyond our comprehension. He says that these are the beings who care for these pure and chosen planets. Pure, because they no longer carry any stain in the intimacy of their souls. They are literally immaculate. They are those of whom Jesus says, "Blessed are the ye pure in heart, for these will see God." So the Supreme Lord of the universe, who is God, has them side by side as his, let's say, representatives to take care of each of these conditions that are spread throughout the universe, in the form of planets, in the form of suns, in the form of stars, solar systems, galaxies. Each of these expressions that we see with current science has these beings at a very high level of understanding of life that we do not suspect. Emmanuel says in the same book that this community of beings, who are already angelic and perfect, of which Jesus is one of the divine members, Jesus is one of the divine members, he is not the only one. It has only already gathered in the vicinity of Earth twice. No, twice in the course of known millennia. The first occurred when the planet Earth was detaching itself from the solar nebula, when the process of formation of the entire solar system was taking place, which is a process that science explains, and that is in complete consonance with what Emmanuel explained. Intare on the way to the light tabay. At this time, when the planet Earth was not Jesus existed, he was a pure and chosen spirit. The planet Earth did not exist, and Jesus was already a pure and chosen spirit. Now, if that's the case, what does that mean? That obviously Jesus Christ did not evolve on this planet. Jesus Christ is an extraterrestrial, extraplanetary being, because the planet was formed under his direct coordination. Emmanuel even says in the book Tarte that Jesus Sartor, in such a poetic way that I brought it here for us to share. The nebula that formed the earth was detached from the sun, and under the command of Jesus and his divine representatives, this matter was worked on over time until it transformed into the earthly orb we live in today. Jesus has been leading this challenge since the planet's creation. And in the book The Comfort that comes in question 85, Emmanuel reinforces this with a simple phrase. Jesus was the divine sculptor of the planet's geological work. Jesus was the divine sculptor of the planet's geological work. Now, what can we conclude? A few. First, as we've already said, he was already pure before the Earth existed. Just to give you an idea, the planet Earth is 4.566 billion years old. It's 4 times 10 to the 9th, or followed by 9 zeros for age. We emerged on Earth as human beings about 40,000 years ago. as human beings with a civilization already characterized about 40,000 years ago. As primates, as those were already in the process of modification about 4 million years ago. 4 million years. We are talking about 4 times 10 to the 6th. There it is, 4 times 10 to the power of 9. That is, we have been on Earth for a very short time, and the Earth was all coordinated, guided under the auspices of Jesus. Now, this information alone reinforces what he said before. Abraham existed, I am. What does this mean? That Abraham hadn't even been created, simple and ignorant like all of us here, and Jesus already existed as a pure and chosen being. Do you understand why the benefactors in the book of Spirits with 501 questions clearly stated that the most perfect type is Jesus? They knew that the magnitude of this being who descended to earth to bring us light. Well, there are some questions that leave us wondering, right, that we need to address. This community is of pure and chosen spirits as our benefactor, Emmanuel said. And then, studying the subject in more depth, one will realize that there is a difference between the word chosen and the word angel. And this difference is presented to us by Emmanuel. He says, the chosen one is the one who has ascended to God in a straight line. The chosen one is the one who has led himself to God in a straight line, without the falls that are not common. And it is fair to say that the earthly orb has only seen one chosen one, which is Jesus Christ. That is the chosen one. He does not commit the deviations that we commit and have to repair in successive reincarnations. Our reincarnation is not in a straight line. Our reincarnation is in a zigzag. An ascensional process, but in a zigzag. We commit errors. The law of cause and effect obliges us to repair them. We realize that if we cannot control our will to make it compatible with God's will, we will make the same mistake again. We have to make amends again. Emmanuel is saying that Jesus did not conclude his evolutionary journey on another planet that we don't know where, making the same detour that we did. He evolved in a straight line. As Emmanuel says, the word angel, and he put it in quotation marks, should designate, these are his words. It's in the book, The Comforter, question 277. Studies that have already ascended to the higher plane, fully redeemed. That is, we are talking about on spirits who made mistakes, how they corrected their deviations and redeemed themselves before cosmic consciousness and became pure spirits, but not chosen, angelic beings. So the only chosen being that exists on our planet who descended to it is called Jesus Christ. Well, we arrive at this conclusion, therefore, that Jesus was destined to be chosen at the same time as Abraham's transition to an angelic state. He would one day, if he hadn't already become angelic, become so, but he wasn't yet because he needed to reincarnate on earth. When he appeared on earth, he was still a human being evolving like all of us. This is why we begin to see that it's not merely a religious issue. It is a matter of sound reasoning and logical thought. Because when you understand that this being descended from such a high place to come to us and teach us how to live, when you know that he is a being beyond our comprehension, you begin to reflect. It doesn't make sense for me not to follow him, because he is the pinnacle of the pinnacle that I can one day aspire to be. My not following him is illogical. It doesn't make sense for me not to know what he said. It doesn't make sense for me not to understand his words. It doesn't make sense for me not to seek understanding. This has nothing to do with religion. This has nothing to do with understanding. Understanding And Jesus will explain everything very clearly using his own words. If anyone still had any doubts before Abraham existed, I am. He will say later in John recorded in chapter 8, verse 28, you are from below. These are words of Jesus recorded by John. I am from above. You are from below. I am from above. You are of this world. I am not of this world. Textual. There is nothing to interpret. Jesus said textually that he does not belong to earth. It is not the Spiritist doctrine interpreting now with Emmanuel. It is Jesus himself categorically stating that we are from here. We will become angels one day, but never chosen. Higher. He already came from another place much higher. We are of this world. He does not belong to this world. He came to take care of this world because the Supreme Lord of the universe placed him as his representative. So realize that it is very difficult after not knowing this to decide not to even want to know who Jesus was, nor to want to know what lessons he brought, because you are going against common sense. You start from that reasoning. So we conclude clearly with just these two expressions, that contact he had there in the Sanhedrin saying that he existed before Abraham, and his own statement saying that we are from down here and he is from above, that we are from this world and he is from another. He himself said this. So we know that Jesus evolved outside this planet. Well, yeah, he is the purest spirit we have seen. But you might ask, well, if he didn't evolve here, where did Jesus evolve? Someone might ask out of curiosity, so what was the solar system? What other system existed out there in the universe? And there are trillions upon trillions of them. Where did Jesus evolve? And the answer is natural. Emmanuel says, men will always receive divine revelations in accordance with their evolutionary position. This is in the book The Comforter, question 271. What are you trying to say here, Emmanuel? That this answer is not yet compatible with our understanding of the subject. Our psyche is not yet sufficiently expanded for certain understandings that later revelations will come and tell us. The important thing at this moment is to know that he is the most perfect type, that he is the guide, that he is the model, that he is the greatest expression of God on earth for all of us. So much so that for many, many centuries, we confused him with God himself. Even today, some religious schools call Jesus God, which is not true. Jesus is the greatest expression of God, but he is not God. He himself affirmed this. I and the Father are one. Not meaning that he was God, meaning that wherever he was, with whomever he was, at whatever moment he was, he would always do God's will, right? In that place where he was, he would think, he would speak, he would do, he would feel exactly what God would be feeling if he could be there at that moment. At that moment. That's why it's easy to confuse him with God. It's not a naive mistake. It's a logical error. Even though there are other elements where he clearly says he is not God, but it is possible to confuse him. But why? Because he is the most perfect type. He came here and does God's will, teaching us how we should do it. Teaching us how we should do it. Well, someone might say, Max, oh, but let's just talk about one more example. That one is too short. There's nothing more to do it. Look, we could certainly spend until midnight talking about the examples in the gospel, but we're not going to do that for the benefit of your health and peace. We're only going to talk about two more moments where it becomes clear that Jesus is not of this world, that Jesus is above this world. John the Evangelist, when he inaugurates his gospel, which is entirely pneumatic, entirely transcendental, unlike the other three, which are synoptic, very similar to each other, John does not. John transcends. He is not concerned with questions of time. He is not at all connected with temporal matters, with physical matters. No, he is directly connected with spiritual matters. Therefore, his gospel is a gospel that you have to understand differently. And he begins the gospel in a striking way. Right in chapter 1, verse 1, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. To know. And the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. That's why many people get confused. Sometimes he says the Word was God. Other times he says he was with God. And he continues, all things were made through him, and without him nada. Nada. Nothing was made that has been made. He continued, he was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him, O Soloi. He was in the world, and the world was made through him, yet the world did not know him. So much so that they murdered him. And the Word continues, he became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son from the Father. Then he became flesh. Refers to the reincarnation of Jesus, or rather the incarnation, because Jesus did not reincarnate here even once. He incarnated only once. That was when he was here among us 2,000 years ago. His incarnation was unique and truly special. In that same book, On the Way to the Light, I recount the preparation that was necessary to make the psychosphere of this planet minimally adequate for a psychic being as high as Jesus descending to earth. Some spirits say that Mary does not belong to earth. It was necessary for his mother to be brought from another celestial community to be able to energetically contain the potential she would struggle for in her womb. The preparation of the world was so enormous that at the time Jesus arrived, the Roman Empire had been without war for the longest period. It is the longest interregnum between wars that we have ever had in the history of Earth to this day. Everyone, when talking about something that attracts attention, mentions the era of Augustus. Why? Because it was Emperor Augustus who was one of the figures who descended to earth to prepare the way for the arrival of Jesus. His coming had to have a very special condition that we have no idea what was done. We have brief insights that were put up by Emmanuel, but nothing more than that. But it went far beyond that. That's because he didn't have a perispirit like ours. How could a body of flesh be molded for such a being? He became flesh. We know this, and that's what matters. But we don't know him. John was explicit, as he himself had been in the words we previously mentioned. But we can't stop here. There are other moments when Jesus also brings this certainty to those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. On one occasion, he was walking with the apostles, some of them, and out of nowhere, he simply addressed the apostles with a question like this: who do they say? Who do they say? Who do men say that the Son of Man is? He was referring to himself as the Son of Man, which we know is the most perfect type of human possibility that we will have on earth. There is not a single report of any health problem of Jesus, illness, nothing. It is the most perfect body that we could ever achieve in the evolutionary experimentation of the planet. That is why he was called the Son of Man. And he asks, who do they say I am, right? Who is the Son of Man? And then the apostles promptly replied, look, some say that the Lord is John the Baptist. Others say that the Lord is Elijah. Or even others say that the Lord is Jeremiah or other prophets. So here it becomes clear that they had an understanding of reincarnation, even if they couldn't explain how the mechanism of reincarnation worked, as is clear to us today. But they were clear that reincarnation could exist because they were saying that Jesus could have been one of the prophets. Notice that the apostles themselves still didn't have an understanding of the spiritual magnitude of Jesus. They lacked comprehension. Jesus, perceiving the inadequacy of the answer they had heard from the others, goes to ask them directly, who do you say that I am? Now the question is directly to them. Who do you say that I am? And then a mediumistic phenomenon occurs. At that precise moment, Peter enters a trance-like this mediumistic state. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And then Jesus promptly replies, Blessed are you, Simon, son of Boccaccio. For it was not flesh and blood that revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. When he was baptized to fulfill the prophecy by John the Baptist, we heard a voice in heaven saying, This is my Son. Remember, if you observe, the gospel is full, overflowing with this information that confirms who Jesus is. But for many centuries, either we couldn't understand it or we didn't want to. So the question now is no longer who is Jesus. There's no doubt about that anymore. The question is, who are we? That's why it's Jesus and us. And that is the most essential question to ask, especially in the present moment of severe planetary transition that the planet has entered, aggravated, and will become increasingly aggravated. We are expelling recalcitrant souls, entrenched in evil, receiving new souls and revitalizing old souls. But the planet is undergoing a transformation unlike anything we have ever witnessed before. We had a planetary transition when we moved from a so-called primitive world to a world of atonement and trials about 40,000 years ago. Now we are undergoing another transition from a world of atonement to a world of regeneration. And the transformations, the events, the madness, the cruelties that are exacerbated on this planet are alarming. And if you don't have eyes to see, you think the world is lost. But if you understand that there is a very long-term plan, not a human one, but a divine one, you understand that everything that is happening now needs to happen. Because after the storm will come the calm, and the environment will be cleansed of perverse, cruel, but completely insensitive creatures, who will be just as we were 40,000 years ago, taken from a planet that was in the same condition as ours now, brought here to Earth, which was in a primitive state, entering a world of expiation and trials. Who are we? And we ask for help, Emmanuel, so that you do not answer this question. Paul, Emmanuel says in the book, The Comforter, question 243, all the spiritual entities incarnated on the terrestrial orb, all are spirits that are redeeming themselves or learning from human experiences after the falls of the past. All of us, without any exception, not even the apostles, all of us are spirits who are redeeming the successive falls of the past. The Old Testament image of the fall of Adam and Eve is a symbolic, representing our own fall, not doing the Father's will, but doing our own capricious, selfish, and self-centered will, when we should be doing the Father's will, which is a fraternal and loving will that considers others as much as itself. Or regenerating through the law of cause and effect, through the mechanism of reincarnation. All creatures have the right to err. It is a law that grants us all free will. We cannot and should not have our consciences violated by any superior being. Not even Jesus violates our consciences. We have the right to decide. Therefore, what will come of it is our responsibility. And what divine justice does is place another law right before our decisions, which it calls the law of cause and effect, where every cause will have a repercussion, every cause will have a consequence, every cause will have an effect that will be on the very creature that generated the cause, non-transferable. It cannot pass from one to another, and it cannot escape it erf to fall. It is inserted into the person themselves, into their very being, into their domains, into their perispirit, and there it remains lodged, awaiting the hour of just redemption. But the law is not only one of justice, because the Father knows that the prodigal son occasionally asks for his inheritance and goes off to roam the world with the follies that are usually committed. The Father knows that the Son will return. And the Father, besides the justice, that impels him to awaken when he says, I have sinned against heaven and before you, Father, is when he awakens. The Father knows that every son who returns needs support, needs help, needs compassion, and that is why the law of justice is always accompanied by the law of mercy. And if the individual who has transgressed against divine law has the inner understanding and strives with all their inner good will to do the Father's will, compensating for their errors, they can cover a multitude of sins if they do so in the form of love. Suffering is not necessary. The Father even permitted that. Even if you caused another to suffer, you do not need to suffer if you repay in love what you owe in pain. It is the law that pain is the teacher. That teaches the creature not to commit further transgressions. Therefore, we are all beings who redeem ourselves on this planet. And this planet is characteristically a minimally threefold environment. It is a school, it is a hospital, and it is a prison. This depends on the redemptions each of us is undertaking or the achievements each of us is making. If an individual is imprisoned in their mute, deaf body, unable to express themselves to the world, it is a necessary prison for that soul, for that moment in their life. To those on the outside, it seems cruel, but to those who understand God's merciful justice, it is a blessing for their immortal spirit life. The one suffering in the hospital is undergoing a process of purging the soul's impurities through overwhelming, agonizing pain. Buksa minaligar, which frees the soul from the guilt complexes that generated the pain, from the intransigent remorse that demands its due. Therefore, those who understand the spiritual hospital of pain know that after the suffering will come calm for the soul. But above all, this planet is a school planet. It is such a school planet that the Spirit, in a marvelous way, managed to create a poem. And the last stanza of this poem says, if you seek Spiritism, be guided by its light. Spiritism is a school, and the beloved master is Jesus. This was said by Casimiro Cunha in the first book published by our dear Chico Zavio when he was 17 years old. If you seek Spiritism, be guided by its light. Spiritism is a school, and the beloved master is Jesus. We only go to the hospital or to prison, which are repetitions, if we do not follow the lesson that the master taught us. What we have been doing with Spiritism since 1857 is trying to instill the lessons of the gospel in human minds. Spiritism has no higher purpose than to enable Jesus to live within our hearts, just as he lived during the first century. That is why he called it the living gospel, revived in the first century. And that is why we need to analyze whether we are observing the lessons of Jesus. No offense returned. Now, many of us know the lesson, but when push comes to shove, when the blood boils, as they say, oh, the creature does not follow Jesus. It follows its primitive impulses, its atavisms from past journeys, giving vent to impulse and not to the reason. We need to start controlling our impulses because we are already creatures who carry the past within us, reflecting in us today. No problems. You've got a need to retaliate. What's wrong is not mastering, not taming, not controlling them, but the reason we already possess within us. I am not free from being attacked, but I am free from wanting to attack those who attack me. I cannot avoid having enemies, but I can avoid making enemies. The paths I take for myself, if they are aligned with the paths Jesus gave us, will bring us the reward, the consolation, the compensation called peace. Peace, the most precious treasure anyone can ever dream of and have. We are living in times of transition. That's why Emmanuel says it's in the book, the Comforter, in question 238. The Lord's lesson has not yet been understood. The book is from 1940, but it is exactly valid for today, 2026. The Lord's lesson has not yet been understood. The Christianization of human souls. He is saying the Christianization of human souls has not yet gone beyond the first primary stage, folks. Louis and me. We enter school in pre-primary, kindergarten, some wanting to enroll and haven't even entered yet. He's saying this very clearly, and he says it so as not to leave us without hope. Only now, in 1940, does the earthly creature prepare itself for self-knowledge through pain. When the son didn't even have the pig's food for himself, a human being, to eat, it was then with that pain, with that humiliation, the pain of hunger, the pain of extreme humiliation, being reduced to the level of the pigs, which is the most disgusting animal for the Jewish people. That's when he awoke. It was necessary for him to go through this painful experience, to wake up and say, Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Accept me as one of your hired servants. And the Father receives him with an embrace. The Father celebrates, because it is a joy for heaven when one of his wayward children, that sheep that left the fold, returns at the shepherd's call. It is at this moment that pain is a teacher. Only in this moment can pain be a friend. It is at this moment that pain is the companion you wouldn't have on any other path. It is fundamental to understand pain as part of the school's movements. He concludes by saying on this same point, therefore, the evangelization of the collective soul is no longer about the individual, but about the collective soul for the new era of concord of fraternity that will enter the world of regeneration and can only be carried out in a general way in the third millennium. We here are living in the third millennium. He said this in the second millennium, 1940. We are in 2026 in the third millennium. We have until the year 3000 for this to happen. I told you that in Europe, I have worked with people from Europe, and they have tremendous difficulty. The Brazilians who are there have the extremely difficult task of founding spiritist centers and engaging the natives there. They don't accept Jesus. If you mention Jesus in the mediumistic meetings, they won't participate. Think about that. You're in Brazil, the heart of the world, the homeland of the gospel, where everything is easy. Think about the difficulty of bringing Jesus to these people who are unaccustomed to Jesus because they've distanced themselves from him due to the madness that humanity has committed in his name. They killed, imprisoned, burned in the name of Jesus. And through an atavistic process, this is very strongly present within these people, and they reject the Jesus that man presented, not the Jesus we know. That's why the Spiritist doctrine must not only send out its agricultural resources, but also send out its evangelical resources that we possess today. No planet, no city, no country on this planet has had the opportunity to have a Chico Xavier bringing 412 books of Jesus' will to earth, of pure superior knowledge. And we here have this in our blessed hands. People there need to translate it. They need to have it in their hand. Complicated. And to finish, let's remember that in the Gospel according to Spiritism, in chapter 20, the Spirit, Constantine said, good Spiritists, because there are Spiritists who are not yet good. Good Spiritists, my beloved, you are the workers of the last hour. That refers to the parable of the vineyard. The hour has come. The moment has come. You must sacrifice the propagation of the gospel. Your customs, your work, your meaningless engagements. For to the whole or todo fasik of righteousness. You have to sacrifice. You have to live the gospel as if you were Christ himself living it. You have to abandon these human worldly habits and begin to follow the habits that lead you to the highest. Go and preach, said Constantine. What this means is that you have to live the gospel in such a way that the people who see you, the people who see me, the people who see us, read it in us through our way of life, our habits, our examples. The gospel, as Paul said, we have to be living letters of the gospel. There is no record of Jesus ever getting angry or confronting someone because he was irritated by something that displeased him. No, why do we need to get annoyed when something violates our personality and we feel offended? It demonstrates smallness of soul. It demonstrates an absence of spiritual stature that we have to conquer through hard effort of silencing ourselves to tame these bad tendencies to react when we have to act with the gospel as our support. This is the living letter that Paul spoke of. People have to read in our expressions in the world how the gospel needs to be learned. That is what the school has to do, this earthly school. Because the Spirit said in the book Renunciation, in its second part, that Spiritism needs to be understood. This message needs to be known so that we understand it and it needs to be meditated upon. It has to make sense. Someone can't just speak and I accept it as if it were just words. No, I have to understand it. It has to make sense. And in meditation, I reflect, and I reach a conclusion. And after that, I am able to make the fundamental point that sets us apart from the world, which is called feeling the gospel. It's one thing to know, to be here in the realm of the logic of reason. It's another thing to feel, to be here in the realm of the heart's feeling. When you're just here, you may be knowledgeable about many things, but you may have a cold, insensitive heart. But when you have this superior knowledge and download it here, you feel what you know. You are a sensitive heart with wisdom. A speaker who comes here and speaks on a certain subject based only on knowledge, will impact you. You will say, wow, he knows his stuff. But then another speaker comes along with the same knowledge and speaks from the heart. You might say, wow, this speaker touches our hearts because it's one thing to speak what you feel and another to speak what you know. We need to know, but we need to feel what we know, because only then, as some said, will we truly live the gospel. Therefore, let us remember Jesus. He was here in the world. It was the second meeting that Emmanuel mentioned that took place to decide on his coming to earth. The two meetings that took place with that community of pure and chosen beings. And when he was here on earth, he called us and said, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation. We are in a planetary transition. It is a world of trials, but have courage, soul. I have overcome the world. That is why he is the most perfect type that God offered us to serve as a guide and model. He overcame the world and taught us how to overcome as well. By following him, we too will overcome. It depends on our choices. Much peace to all. Much peace to all, and thank you very much for your attention.